How many choices have you made today already? I'm going to guess you made a bunch. For example, you decided, I better wake up. That's a good choice. And then you decided, I should brush my teeth. Or I should use the restroom. Or, if you're like me, I need coffee. Then you decided, let's go to church. By the way, that's a great decision. Glad you guys are here. But you had to make all kinds of decisions: what to wear, when to leave, how to drive here, whether to say hi to the guy in the front at the front door, whether to get some coffee here, whether to get something to eat, where to sit. Big decisions. Obviously, some decisions are bigger than others. Yesterday, I did a wedding for a young lady and a young man who attend here. That's a big decision. Bigger decisions exist all around us, though, like where am I going to work? Where am I going to live? What kind of person will I be? Who will I follow? Will I follow God? Will I follow Jesus? Some decisions are really actually life and death decisions. As we get ready to finish this series, we find Moses, and he's winding down the last of 3 important sermons that he's given to Israel. We've been in the book of Deuteronomy now for 7 weeks. Deuteronomy is basically 3 separate sermons that Moses preached to the Israelites right before they were about to step foot into the promised land. Remember where we are in terms of Bible history. Israel was enslaved in Egypt. Moses went to Pharaoh. He said, "Let my people go." At first, Pharaoh resisted. Then after the 10 plagues, he told them to leave. Then the Israelites crossed over the Red Sea. Then they were in the desert for about 40 years wandering. The reason is because that first generation of Israelites rejected God and his promises. And so God said, you need to spend some time in the desert, and I'm going to let the next generation of people, your children, into the promised land. And so Moses is preaching this last sermon to the second generation of Israelites, and he ends the sermon like any good preacher with a call to action. He says, look, you have a choice. You decide what you want. Do you want good or do you want evil? Do you want blessing or do you want a curse? Do you want to follow God or do you want to follow idols? Essentially, he's asking, do you want life or do you want death? What we're going to find in our passage today is that this choice has huge implications for Israel that last for centuries. But even today, now, this passage has huge implications for us as well. And so we're going to track through these verses and pull whatever kind of application out we can so that it makes a difference in our life. Let's dig in, starting with verse 11. It says, "For this commandment that I command you today is not," what's your Bible say? "Too hard for you, neither is it far off." He says it's not too hard, nor is it far off. Now, what commandment is he talking about? Well, he's essentially saying all of the things that I have told you in these last 3 sermons. Deuteronomy 5 to Deuteronomy 26. And we don't have time to review all of that. We've gone over some of it. But essentially, it started with the 10 commandments. And then there was a lot of information on how and where to worship, what kind of foods they should eat, even how they would conduct themselves in war. And so Moses is saying here, everything that God has told me to tell you, I need you to do it. It's not that difficult. Look at verse 12. "It is not in heaven that you should say, 'Who will ascend to heaven for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it?' Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, 'Who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it?'" What's he getting at? These principles, these commandments that Moses has been giving to them, they're not complicated. They're not these theoretical, lofty ideas of exotic doctrine that only people that are well-educated can grasp. He's saying these commandments are for everybody and they're easy. Don't make it too hard. How well does God know people? Does God know that people have a tendency to overcomplicate things? Have you ever met somebody that somehow figured out how to overcomplicate everything? Are you the person who tends to overcomplicate everything? Okay, I'm guilty of that too. And I think as a church, we tend to do that. I was at this conference a few weeks ago, and one of the speakers, a guy named Jossi Chaco, he runs a ministry to Asia. But he gave this great illustration, and so I want to use it. But, what if you asked your kid, hey, I need you to clean your room today. And so later at the dinner table, you're eating, and you say to your kid, hey, did you clean your room? And the kid says, no, but I prayed about it. And then I blogged about it. And then I had some friends over, and we had like a little study about it, whether I should clean my room. And we all shared our own experiences, stories about cleaning the room. And the dad says, I know, but did you clean the room? No, but then I wrote some songs about it, and we sang them together. And I'm thinking of sending some other people out into different neighborhoods and maybe into different countries to tell other people about how they should talk and think and sing about cleaning their rooms. Maybe we'll have conferences about whether we should clean our rooms. But did you clean your room? No, but one day I might. Sometimes the church is sort of guilty of that. Jesus accuses the Pharisees of this very thing. In Matthew 23, he preaches this sermon called the 7 Woes. Fantastic sermon. But basically what he says to the Pharisees, he's like, look, you guys love talking about the law. You love thinking about it. You love looking important and sounding important. The only problem is you just haven't done it. You talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk. The most basic, simple things you haven't done. He says, you missed the point. You don't practice justice. You don't practice mercy. You don't practice faithfulness. That's what Moses is saying. This is not hard. Don't make it complex. And I know that sometimes we do that, or at least I should say sometimes I do that, because it's kind of like a spiritual smokescreen. Think about it. You'll be like, nobody will know that I'm disobeying the commands of God because I'm too busy sounding like I know everything about the commands of God. Are you with me? Like if I just talk about things and attend different things and sing the right songs and go the right places, I could actually avoid having to do the thing that God asked me to do. Now, you're saying to yourself, okay, well, wait a minute, though. I don't want to get confused. Aren't I supposed to talk about God and think about God and read about God and go to church and talk about? Of course you are. But not at the expense of just simply obeying God. Verse 14, he says, but the word is what? Very near to you. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart so that you can do it. He's like, look, you already know it. You've already talked about it. And there's a huge payoff, by the way, because he says, if you obey God, if you love him, if you live right, you will be blessed. Look at verse 16. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways and by keeping his commandments and his statutes and his rules, then you shall live and multiply. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. This is simple cause and effect. If the Israelites choose to live right and to obey God, then God is ready to unleash his full measure of blessing onto the people. And know this, God is not stingy. He's not stingy with his blessings. Sometimes people think that. People assume that God is stingy. He's like a kid that has a bag of Skittles with only 5 Skittles left and 4 of them are purple. You know you're not getting one. Or some people think like God is stingy, like that cheap dad, and you go out to eat and you're 15 years old and he still makes you order off the kids' menu. And no, you can't have a drink. Stuck with water. I wonder why people think God is stingy. I wonder if it has to do with the fact that our communion cups are only that big. God is not stingy. As a matter of fact, later in the Bible, he says, test me and see if I don't pour out blessings from heaven so much that you will not be able to contain it. See, the Israelites at this point, they've just tasted God's blessing. They were in the desert, they were hungry, God gave them manna. Every single day, manna. Nothing extravagant, but it kept them fed. They wanted meat, God sent them quail to eat. They were thirsty, God provided water for them. But it's just really a taste. See, as they step into the promised land, there's amazing blessing there. Remember what the Bible said? Houses that you didn't build, fields that you didn't plant, a city that you didn't build. It's all right there, blessing right waiting for them. But if they reject God, what is the penalty? If they go after idols like their parents, Moses says they will not live long in the promised land, but that they will perish. See, what we need to understand is that these commandments that Moses is talking about, starting with the 10 commandments, then the information about worship and food, those commandments are not imposed on the Israelites just to make their life hard or impossible. Those commandments were given to them to make their life good, to make their life safe, to make their life enjoyable. It's what a loving father does for his children. He creates boundaries so that the child can live and grow up safely and have a full, wonderful life. Anybody that has kids should understand this clearly. Am I right? It reminds me of when I was younger. My parents had some rules for me. They're actually sitting in the back there, so this should be fun. One of the rules was about certain movies that I could and couldn't see. Now, I was a certain age, and I wanted to see some movies like all of my friends were seeing. And I remember there was this one particular movie that I really wanted to see because everybody was talking about it at school. And I asked my parents if I could go see it, and they said no. I said, why not? Because it's got swearing in it. It's got some sexuality in it. It's got violence in it. The answer is no. And I thought to myself, if your job is to make my life miserable and hard, well, then you're doing a great job. Someone should give you a raise. Now that I'm older, now that I have kids of my own, I realize, okay. All right, these rules are in place to help me. Those rules were in place to keep me safe, to keep my mind pure and clean. Sometimes I think people feel like God is like this cosmic killjoy with his rules. Like God is the ultimate helicopter parent. And so like spoiled children, we fight against God. We try to circumvent his rules. We say we know better. And you know what you find out though? When you ignore God's guidelines, you tend to suffer the repercussions of your own bad choices. See, if you break God's rules, so to speak, you suffer the penalty of your own bad decisions. Like a lot of times people think that God just punishes people for doing bad. And he certainly did that in the Old Testament. But a lot of times what happens is your own sin just lands you in hot water. If you spend a lot of time lying to other people, guess what happens? People don't trust you, and then you won't have very many friends. If you were to commit adultery, for example, likely you'll end up with a broken marriage and a fractured family. If you spent most of your time coveting, meaning wishing and wanting what other people have, you'll spend most of your life being dissatisfied. Think of the times that you've strayed. Has it led to problems? If not, it will. Moses is saying, there's a better way. God's way. And then he literally puts the choice right in front of them. Look at verse 19. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life that you and your offspring may live. I can't help but think of that famous scene in Indiana Jones. You know, the one where they go into the cave and they find the Templar Knight there and there's all those holy grails there. And the goal is the guy has to pick the right one. Now, by the way, the Holy Grail is not like a real thing, but this works great for my illustration. So he has to pick the right cup and drink out of it to have everlasting life. But of course, he picks the wrong cup, and then he turns into this horrible, like, scary thing and then dies, and the knight says, he chose poorly. This choice is in front of the Israelites. And it seems obvious. Look at the first one. The choice for life. How do you get it? You obey God. You love God. And then what happens? God multiplies you. And he blesses you. What's the other choice? Let's look at that over here. Death. Well, you disobey God. You follow after idols. The result, you perish and you are cursed. That's the choice that Moses puts in front of them. It seems easy, doesn't it? Well, then why is it so hard? Let me ask you, how do you think the Israelites did with this choice? Like I said earlier, Deuteronomy, it's kind of bittersweet because Moses actually predicts the failure of the Israelites. In the next couple chapters, he'll do a few things. First, he commissions his replacement, Joshua. Then he asks the priest to take the law, the first 5 books, including Deuteronomy, and to put it in the Ark of the Covenant. And then he says this, I know after my death you will turn away and go from God to other idols. And then Moses writes a song. He gives one more blessing, and then he dies. It's kind of sad, isn't it? But he was right. For the next 1,000 years, the Israelites will struggle to follow God. They'll fall into this pattern of obeying God and loving God and then turning away from God and following idols. And then they'll repent and they'll go back to loving God and obeying God, and then they'll turn away and they'll follow after idols. And this goes on and on and on in this vicious cycle. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Now, if you're like me, you want to do better than the Israelites. You want to make the right choice. You want to choose life. But the question might be, how? How do I choose life instead of death? How do I make that choice? What does it look like? Well, what I want to do is give you 3 practical ways to choose life. And you can jot these down. I thought about this quite a bit, talked about it with a few people, and wanted to make this something that you could actually put into practice. Here's the first one. When it comes to choosing life, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to recognize that he chose you first. What that does is it takes you out of the equation and puts the emphasis on God's action. Because if you are the one that's responsible for choosing God first, then that's based on the way you feel. But if you understand that God chose you first, it's based on the way he feels. In the book of 1 John chapter 4, verse 19, it says this. I'll put up on the screen. We love because he first loved us. Basically stated, it's not about you. Israel was God's chosen nation. Do you realize that? God just picked them out. He could have picked out a different group of people, but he didn't. He went to Abraham and he said, okay, I am going to make from you a great nation. You will be my people and I will be your God. And there were nations around them that were not chosen by God, but God picked Israel. I think that Israel took that for granted. I think they forgot how special they were. And later we see that they made it about them. They made it about what they wanted. So step one, realize that God picked you first. It's about him. Step number two, you've got to unchoose yourself. You want to choose life? Okay, unchoose yourself. What do I mean by this? Well, let's look at that death list again for 1 second. Nobody would pick this, would they? Nobody would go, you know what, that sounds pretty good. I'll take perishing and I'll take a curse. But here's the problem. The choice for death doesn't look like death. It looks like something that serves our own ambition and our own desire. You know that a few chapters ago, we studied the fact that God told the Israelites to go into the promised land, and what did he say? He said, disassemble all of the houses of worship that are to idols. Smash all the idols. Crush all of the items that you would worship that are not God. Get rid of them. Destroy them. Because God knew that the Israelites would be tempted to go after other gods. So when you unchoose yourself, here's what you're doing. You're disassembling the idol of yourself. You know, if you put yourself first in your life, what happens is right there in your heart, you have a tiny little idol. And if you want to know what it looks like, just look in the mirror. You've got to say, God, I put you on the throne of my life. I'm going to disassemble the idol of self. I'm not going to go after these other gods that make me the most important thing. I'm going to go after you because you are the most important thing. And here's the third one. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. What did Moses say? He said, it's not that hard. It's right in front of you. It's not way up in heaven. It's not far off. You already know it. It's in your heart. It's in your mouth. Remember, they asked Jesus about the law. Do you remember this? They said, hey, what's the most important law? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's out of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. Then he said, oh, and by the way, love your neighbor as yourself. That's Jesus keeping it simple. He took all of the law, all 5 books, and he said, I'll sum it up for you. Just love God and love your neighbor. You focus on doing that, you'll fulfill the rest of it. Jesus died so that you could keep it simple. Now you might be thinking, no, wait a minute. So keeping it simple, what does that mean? I should still come to church, right? I should still read my Bible. I still should pray and serve. Of course you should. You should practice holiness. You should practice forgiveness. You should share the gospel. But you have to make sure that those things don't keep. You should make sure that you understand this, that those things don't keep God at the center of your life. They're a result of having God at the center of your life. Let me just park on that for a moment because this is super important that we understand this. The challenge for the Israelites here is that it was about actually following the rules. They had to do these things to achieve the blessing. Now, if they fell out of line, they had a sacrificial system. They would go to the temple, they would offer a lamb or a bull or some animal sacrifice, and they would be forgiven, and then they would start over again. That's why it was a cycle. But Jesus died to break that cycle. He completed the cycle. So I don't want you to think that, okay, what I need to do to keep God at the center of my life is pray more, is read more, is sing better, serve harder, give more. Those things don't keep God at the center. As a matter of fact, if you're not careful, you'll start to take pride in those things, and they'll put you right back in the center. You do those things because God is at the center. It's a natural flow. The best way I could kind of say it is, I think sometimes the best way to be a Christian is to sort of do less and let God do more. Is to let God sort of do it in you and through you. A good illustration might be if you ever go to one of those car washes where you drive up and you got to get your wheels onto the tracks, and they kind of tell you to come forward, and then they do this, and they say, what? Put it in neutral, take your foot off the brake, take your hands off the wheel. What happens? The car moves forward on its own. In a lot of ways, that's the Christian life. That's why Jesus came and fulfilled the law. Later, Paul, in the book of Romans, talks about the fact that the law was incomplete to make us holy. But Jesus came and fulfilled the law on our behalf, and now when we accept Him, we become holy. It's as if we completed the law. So, what's your decision today? You've got a choice to make. It's a big one. Life and death. Will you choose Jesus? You know, if you've never decided to follow Jesus, that is an important decision. Everybody has to make that decision. And it's not hard. That's the beautiful thing about it. You can pray a prayer in the quietness of your own heart. That prayer could sound something like this. Dear Jesus, I know that I've messed up. I know that I've fallen short. I've been trapped in a cycle. And I want to follow you. Help me to do better and come and live in my life. Now you can put that into your own words. You can pray that right now. You can pray that later today. But if you make that decision to follow Christ, do one other thing, and that's tell somebody that you know and that you trust, so they can get you in touch with the right people and help you take the next steps. Or tell one of us. But the bigger thing is for maybe a lot of you that are already following Christ. You're already a believer. You're like, okay, what does this mean for me? See, I think the real key is it's not really a decision that you make once. Following Christ is a decision that you make at a time and place, and you usually follow that up with baptism. But we still have the choice every day to do what? Recognize that God chose us and live in that grace. Recognize, too, we're not the center of our own universe. Dethrone yourself every single day. Make sure God is at the center of your life. And then number 3, consistently work to keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. What do I mean? Just do it. Just live in that. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's how you choose life. Let's pray.